Hello, my name is Yunfang. On behalf of Selective Mutism Association of China, we have invited Maggie Johnson, a pioneer in the field of treating selective mutism, to talk to us about selective mutism and her book, co-authored with Alison Wynne-Jens, Selective Mutism Resource Manual. The second edition of the manual has been translated into Chinese and recently published in China. We are also happy to have June Reitman, translator of the Selective Mutism Resource Manual, with us today. Hi, Maggie.
Hi there.
Hi, June. Okay, so I'm going to start with Maggie.
Okay.
Maggie, you are one of the top experts in the field of treating selective mutism. Could you please tell us how it all got started and what drove you into this special field?
It was a very long time ago now. It was in the 70s and it was my first job. I'd just qualified as a speech and language therapist, and I was placed in a school, a residential school. And one of the first pupils I met, he was a young man who had selective mutism. He was 15 years of age. This was a secondary school. And of course, as it was in the 70s, I was told he had elective mutism. They weren't using the term selective mutism then, because in those days it was believed that this was choice, that the children were deliberately refusing not to speak. So I was very inexperienced. I was told he's refusing to speak, it's your job to get him talking. And I didn't have a clue. And we spent most of that year in silence, or me talking, and we didn't get anywhere. And one day, and I will never forget it, I was doing an assessment. I was asking him to show me pictures. I was just looking at what his vocabulary was like. So I was asking him to point to pictures to identify them. And I looked up and I suddenly noticed there was this tear rolling down his face, and I just felt awful. And I knew he wasn't doing this deliberately. Every textbook, every so-called specialist I was talking to, they were telling me it was deliberate, but I knew this boy did not want to be at this school. If he could have got out of that school by talking, and so that he could go home and be back with his parents, he would have spoken. He didn't want this. He wasn't choosing any of it. And so I mean, I was sympathetic, but I just didn't know what to do. So the end of the year came and this young man left school. And when I went back to the school the following September, all the staff were told that unfortunately he had attempted to take his own life. And that just had an absolutely devastating effect on me. But at the same time, I will always be grateful to him, because sadly, he will never know how much he has helped children and families all over the world, because it's completely because of him that I vowed I could never, ever leave a child, a young person in distress again and not know how to help them. So from then on, I made it my private mission to discover how to help people who had elective mutism. And then, oh gosh, many years later, in the 90s, they finally changed it to selective mutism and confirmed what I already knew, that this was anxiety. This was not deliberate. So yes, it all came from that day. And it does make me sad thinking about it, because I don't know what happened to that young man. I just hope he did find some peace in the end.
Wow, that is so touching. We're
Mm.
so glad that you started doing research and provided so much great information for people suffering from selective mutism. Now, your book, Selective Mutism Resource Manual, is widely known as the Bible for treating selective mutism. And over the years, it has helped countless individuals who have selective mutism and families worldwide. Now, the second edition of this book has been translated into Chinese and published in mainland China. Who is the book written for, and what do you hope this book would achieve?
Well, it was really written for anyone who has an interest in selective mutism at all. It was written for parents, for professionals, treating practitioners, teachers, and the individuals who have selective mutism themselves. There are several sections written specifically for teenagers and adults. So it is aimed at a very wide audience. And I think that's what perhaps makes it a little bit unwieldy to start with. There is so much information in there because Alison and I were trying to provide something for everybody, the families and the professionals. But once you get into it and start to treat it very systematically and logically, you can find your way through it. But I think the sheer size of it can be very daunting to start with. So I think it's lovely if parents have got a friend, a volunteer, a support, a relative, somebody to help them calmly go through it and find the sections that are relevant for them in their situation. In fact, talking of the parents, when I got my copy of the Chinese translation, I was just so thrilled to find that there are a number of new prefaces in there that have been written by parents and translators like yourselves, explaining how the manual has been the practical tool that they needed to help them with their own children, to help their children overcome selective mutism. And that is exactly what I hope this book will achieve. My message very much for parents is don't despair if you can't find a professional to treat your child. Don't despair if you can't afford to pay for therapy. You can get by without it. You are in the best position to give your child ongoing support and understanding. And all you need is the right information and the right resources to make that possible. And for the professionals reading the manual, well, I guess I hope to fill the gaps in their knowledge about selective mutism so that they won't be in the situation that I was in all those years ago, confronted with somebody where they've got absolutely no understanding of what they're dealing with or how to help. I really want the professionals to gain that knowledge and be in a position to help children and their families achieve positive outcomes.
Thank you. Now, June, could you please tell us about the background of translating the Selective Mutism Resource Manual? You translated the manual into Chinese and introduced it to China. Why did you do that?
I just hear what Maggie shared, her experience with as working in this field and helping children with selective mutism. I'm a very lucky one. My daughter is the one with selective mutism. When she was 2 years old, she started to develop the symptom, but I didn't figure out until age 5 when she went to school. Psychology tell me your daughter possible have selective mutism. I never heard of such things. And before 5 years old, I brought her to see so many experts, so many doctors. They said that she's perfect. I'm the one have anxiety, have the issue. I should say psychologist. With this book, I have, like Maggie said, before you have the expert to help you, read the book page by page. You find something, starting to do, follow the instruction. You're getting somewhere. That's what happened to my daughter. So I have the book first edition, and I have the book second edition. It's no, I would say every single page provides some information, but I really have to understand it, take time. But as soon as I get the book, I started working on it. So when my daughter got over her selective mutism at age of 10, so you can imagine the struggle as every single parents who have children with selective mutism. I have in my heart, deep inside, I said, my daughter have go through so many difficulty, have so much struggle as parents. Why I hold information inside of me? Why I don't increase awareness of selective mutism? So I came to US 20 years ago, and originally came from China. So my first thinking is, what do we have in Chinese? I did research, doesn't take much long time. I found out there's no one book talking about selective mutism in Chinese. So we contact actually Yvonne, Dr. Yvonne helped me find Maggie. We just said, this is a book, help me from the beginning to the end, all the way. Even Maggie mentioned the teenager time. That's the book I go back to, still look at it. So if we want to increase awareness, that's be the first thing we want to do. We translate the best book about the selective mutism. It's all of information with the form, the figure, the table, with all the reference. So the book is big. It's end up be on the real hard copy is close to like 400, and the online resource is 700. With volunteers' help, we all together, all the mother, dad, and the volunteers' help, in less than a year we finished. So in this world, if we have experience, now fortunate we have children with this way, but it's fortunate we have the book and we're able to help our children. Let's share it. Let's increase it, awareness. So when the book come out, I will say this way, it's surprisingly how much people, parents, psychologists, teachers starting to reach out. I would say we did a good decision translation, and we did a good decision. This is the book we can translate. And at the end, I have to say thank you, Maggie, for the best book I ever can do to translation.
Wow. Well, thank you, June, because if it wasn't for you, there wouldn't be so many Chinese families who've now got access to it. So yeah, the thanks goes both ways. It really does.
Thank you, June and Maggie. Now, June, since its publication in China in October 2020, thousands of copies of the manual have been sold. As the translator and the contact person for Selective Mutism Association of China, what kind of feedback have you heard from readers of the manual?
First one, since 3 years ago, we with Dr. Yvonne, Dr. Shu, and the other SM parents, when we set up what they call WeChat group, that time we have like 20, 30, 50, 100. In few months, I'm talking few months, we have more than 100 parents contact us, join us in the WeChat group. So my first response is the message is very clear, short and the Lord. Lifesaver book. That's it. That's the only sentence. Lifesaver book. And I say the department, like I say the light of tunnel. And one parent just say something, brought my tear out. She said, my son was diagnosed with autism for 4 years. I know now for sure he have selective mutism, not autism. I pull him out from the special needs school. It just touched my heart, hurt my feeling, but I'm grateful this book really saved the children's life. I would say saved the parents' life and, relative too. So because it's a #1 book published in China about the selective mutism, and also the book has so much information. The contact from the school teacher, preschool teacher, from parents, psychology, they all contact me 2 questions. The book is so good, where I start? I have so much information. I starting stressful, I don't know what I should do tomorrow, what I should do today, what is next step? And when I heard those information, what I did? I turn around, ask Maggie, can you record a video to introduce your book, to introduce the key point of your book, of your knowledge, of experience? And I asked the first one, Maggie said yes. I pushed my luck, second one. The publisher come over said, book is so good, so much information, but parents, they are not a professional. And parents who have anxiety, when they have children with selective, make anxiety extra higher. So I said, what do you think? She said, how about a workbook? Parents just flip the book. They say, oh, my son just started the training process. What I should do, how to evaluate the professional, how to know they are the SM expert, how to identify my children is SM or SM is not, or SM with complication. And I said, wow, that's something, I shouldn't have it when I started with my daughter. But when I look at the book, even I translate the book, Maggie, I have to confess, a lot of pages I don't understand until I translate the book. Now I look at the book, I said, oh, this is something I don't understand before. I feel guilty, I didn't know before. Now I think about it, I push my luck. So I asked Maggie second time, I said, can you helping us prepare the working book? Gladly, Maggie said, I will help you. So what I did is we have few, at current stage, we have 6 SM parents who have the children with the selective mutism. We have 6 of us weekly, few hours, we're working together to prepare it. Maggie, thank you to helping us look over, see if the book in the right direction. Of course, you're expert. Tell us, what we should do from there. From the book translation to the video and to the workbook, think about it. How many children, how many family, how many friend and relative will be benefit? Maggie, I thank you. I really appreciate it.
No, once again, June, thank you. It's a great idea, such a good idea to, yes, have a much smaller, a very practical workbook that enables parents to actually observe their own children, take specific examples from the manual, try them out. I think it's a fantastic idea. So now I'm very, very happy to help you with that. I think it'll be a wonderful thing.
We're very excited, looking forward to this new workbook. Now let's talk about selective mutism. Maggie, what is selective mutism and how do you tell if a child has selective mutism?
Okay. Well, I think it's best explained as a phobia of talking in specific situations. And this phobia is triggered by the expectation to speak to people who are outside your immediate comfort zone. So if you have selective mutism, you can talk freely to the people who are in your comfort zone. That's usually the people you've grown up talking to, people like your immediate family, maybe a few close friends. But if you sense an expectation to talk to anyone else, then this phobic reaction is triggered and you would experience all the panic sensations associated with the fight, flight, freeze reflex. It's a very physical feeling of panic. Parents have often commented to me how if their young child is sitting on their lap and they might be having, a nice, singing a song together, having a nice chat, looking at a book, then somebody enters the room, somebody that the child doesn't speak to freely, somebody that the child hasn't grown up talking to, they can feel their child's heart beat and it's racing and it is thumping, and the parent can feel it thumping through the child's rib cage. It's just a horrible sensation of panic. And children don't have the vocabulary to describe this feeling at all. All they know is it feels horrible. And I think using that term phobia is exactly right. SM behaves in exactly the same way as a phobia, and it responds to all the usual treatments for phobias. And indeed, it doesn't respond to all the things that make phobias worse. It absolutely is a phobia. In which case, what you can do is always think of it in terms of a phobia of dogs. If you liken what's happening to if you think about what is happening with the child and you're finding it hard to understand it yourself, because it seems to you, why is the child behaving like this? Put yourself in their position. Think of it as a phobia of dogs, where you could be playing happily in a room with your family or your friends, and then suddenly a dog comes into the room. You would become rooted to the spot. You just become frozen. You go into a state of panic as soon as you become aware of that dog, and it's an automatic reaction. You don't have time to think about it. You see the dog, and the dog triggers this fight, flight, freeze reflex, and you go into this heightened state of alert. So yes, with SM, it's exactly the same. When there is this expectation to talk, you go into this panic reaction, you freeze, and with the freeze, you are unable to speak. It's almost like you feel you hold your breath with shock, just as you would if it was a dog. And you get this feeling of your voice being stuck in your throat, and it won't come out. And it won't come out because all of your muscles in that moment have frozen. And if your muscles are frozen, then your vocal cords can't relax and vibrate and produce voice. As I say, young children can't possibly describe this in this detail. They just know it feels horrible. But as they get older, and more in tune with their bodies, and as long as they're not made to feel bad or guilty about having SM, then they can start to talk about it and describe it, and talk about how it feels for them. And I think it's this sudden change, this absolute sudden change from being completely relaxed and animated one moment, and then stiff, tense, with a frozen facial expression, that moment when your phobia is triggered, or even when you anticipate it, you suddenly dread, you remember that somebody is going to come to see you, and you dread feeling in this way. That sudden change from being relaxed, happy, talking freely, and suddenly still and not being able to speak, that to me is one surefire way to tell if a child has selective mutism. It's all in the body language, that change and that freeze. That doesn't happen with any other condition that children may experience. But often it's only the parents who see that change, because they're the ones who see the child's true personality. They are the ones who see the child when they're completely happy and relaxed, and can talk freely. And in fact, for parents, it's like having a child with two completely different personalities. So the parents are going to see this usual outgoing, chatty, fun-loving personality, and then suddenly, when other people are nearby, the children are much more reticent and might stop talking to the parents. They might just use a few words, start whispering to the parents. That will depend on their age. But as soon as that child is becoming aware that if this new person who's come in might expect me to talk to them, well, then they don't even want that person to hear them talking to a parent. So they find it much more difficult to even speak to their parents in front of other people. As I say, professionals may not see that change. So professionals are likely to base their diagnosis far more on what the information that the child's parents and other key individuals are giving them. Parents and other key individuals, such as teachers, will describe to the professionals the pattern of speech that the child has. They will be able to explain to them exactly the situations when the child doesn't talk. And that's what defines selective mutism. It is defined as a consistent failure to speak in specific social situations. So it's this pattern that you're looking for when they consistently don't speak, compared to the times when this child can speak completely freely. You've got that contrast, and that's what defines selective mutism, a consistent pattern of speaking, not speaking.
Thank you, Maggie. That is very helpful. I think what you said will dispel a lot of myths about selective mutism.
Okay.
Now, how common or rare is selective mutism? And what is the typical age when selective mutism is first diagnosed or first recognized?
Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting that you changed what you said then, because often these children don't get a diagnosis. As June was saying, they might get the wrong diagnosis. It might be diagnosed as autism. So yes, we can't always guarantee there's going to be a diagnosis, but yeah, we can recognize it. We can recognize it. And it's a lot more common than people realize. In the literature, it's recognized that estimates of prevalence are likely to be underestimates. And I think that's because selective mutism is often missed because people don't realize that it's possible for children to answer minimally in certain situations, and that can still meet the criteria of selective mutism. I think often people think you can only make a diagnosis if a child doesn't talk at all in school. And they're looking for a contrast, like they speak at home, but they don't speak at school. You very rarely see that. So, for example, there are times when children can't speak at home either because somebody else is in the room. There's a visitor, a relative they don't see very often, and sometimes they can't even talk to the parent in front of them. So clearly they can't always talk at home, and it's the same at school. Often the child can talk at school to their friend in the playground. Perhaps they can talk in the corner of the classroom when they feel no other adult is watching them. And some children find they can answer their teachers just giving the absolute minimum of information. Now, if you think about it, they still meet the criteria for SM because there is a very consistent pattern of situations where they're not speaking. It's just that for them, they maybe aren't able to answer a straightforward, direct, factual question in a few words. So that's a situation where they may manage to answer, but you'll find that with the same teacher, this child won't be able to initiate conversation. They won't be able to request help or go approach the teacher and report an incident or tell somebody they don't feel well. So there are still plenty of specific situations where the child is failing to speak. So they completely meet the criteria. So as I say, I think these children are often missed when people conduct research into prevalence. So it's going to be a matter of really understanding the diagnosis and interpreting the data correctly. So I think a lot of the time you're going to get an underestimate because children are easily overlooked and regarded as just quiet or shy, when in fact it is selective mutism. So I'm not going to throw any statistics at you because I think the statistics aren't terribly meaningful. But what I will say that certainly in the UK, nurseries and schools can expect to have at least one pupil who has selective mutism. And so it's something that all education staff need to know about. Now, the other thing to add is that selective mutism usually develops before the child starts school, but parents often aren't aware of it because the child can talk easily to them. So they haven't become aware of this time when SM developed. The child is only displaying it with other people when the parents aren't around. And as we know, with very young children, that doesn't happen all that often. They tend to be with their parents most of the time. So typically, SM is first recognised when the child starts nursery or school. That's when it becomes apparent that the child is speaking far more at home than in the educational setting. And in fact, it can be such a shock to parents when staff tell them that their child isn't talking at the nursery or school, because as far as the parent is concerned, that child is so talkative at home. And that might be the first time that they even know that the child has SM. So yes, onset and time of onset when it starts, and time of recognition when it becomes apparent, and time of diagnosis. These can be three very different things.
Okay, thank you. Now, if untreated, will selective mutism go away by itself?
Oh, that is such a good question, because there is absolutely no guarantee that selective mutism will resolve. And I have to be honest about that. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about educating everyone about it. There is absolutely no guarantee that the SM will resolve. But let's remember that selective mutism is a fear, it's a phobia, and fears never go away by themselves. They don't just go away. We work through them, either on our own or with support. And we work through them either by learning more about what it is that we're afraid of, or by gradually facing our fears, or a combination of both. And so it's perfectly possible that children will work through their SM without treatment. So it's not quite the same thing as it going away by itself, but people often think it's gone away by itself, because that's, you know, how it appears to them. What they haven't realised is that that child was just very lucky. That child was lucky enough to have parents and staff who recognised that not talking was not something that the child was doing deliberately. They intuitively gave the right support. They just sensed that there was no point trying to make the child talk, and so instead they allowed the child to talk at their own pace. And what they did was just focus on all the things that the child could do. And in that way, they built up the child's strengths and interests and friendships and self-esteem, and allowed the child to have a very positive experience of life. So they weren't denying that it was happening, but they didn't become so anxious that about it. I suppose what it is, they had faith that the child would get through it. They knew that it wasn't something the child would do deliberately, and I think the parents, I'm going to say, were lucky also that they just had that personality to be quite laid back about it, and they just trusted that the child would it would improve as the child got older. If all of that happens, then it is possible that that the child would appear to work through it. But it's by everybody doing the right things that allows the SM to resolve. Unfortunately, a very different scenario usually unfolds, and it's nobody's fault. Loving, caring, responsive parents and dedicated teachers who all want the very best for their child, they will believe that they are helping the child by encouraging them to talk as much as possible. And what they do is fixate on something that the child has got no control over, and therefore unwittingly, however nicely they're doing it, they will be putting pressure on the child to speak. Even just a simple question like, did you manage to talk to your teacher today? That's putting pressure on the child. It's letting the child know, you really do need to do this. And I'm going to ask you every day until you do. It's just giving a message, you do need to talk. And that's the kind of pressure I'm talking about. It's nobody's fault at all. It is just because you want to give the child the best start in life. The trouble is, pressure makes phobias worse. If we think about a phobia of dogs, if we pressurize that child to go and stroke the dog, it would just make the child resist and be even more afraid. We know pressure doesn't help. And so this is the sad thing, that the people who care for the child most can end up doing the very things that prevent progress being made. And the other, sadly, the children will end up feeling sad and guilty for not living up to their parents' and teachers' expectations. And the children will end up putting pressure on themselves because they want to speak so much, but just don't know how to do it. It's just an awful vicious cycle of everybody then just becoming more and more concerned. And the children also have to deal with a lot of mixed messages, because on the one hand, they're being encouraged to talk, but on the other hand, they're usually being enabled to avoid speaking in various ways. There's lots of things that we do as parents and as teachers to convey the message of avoidance is preferable. Don't worry, someone else can do it for you. There are lots of little things that we do that actually convey the message to the child, don't try and talk, it's too difficult for you. So as I say, lots of mixed messages going on. The child experiences both pressure and avoidance, which are the two things that prolong a phobia. Neither of those things can help. And I think this is what the manual is all about. It's about letting people know that there are little tiny things you've been doing that actually haven't been helping, but don't feel bad about it. You did it for all the right reasons. The important thing is to know how to change. And there are lots of little simple tips and techniques, ways that we support the child and reduce the child's anxiety in other ways that don't prolong the phobia.
Thank you, Maggie. That is why so important your message is. So if more people have access to what you said in your book, in your lectures, so many children can be helped.
Good.
Now, according to your research, including your observation in the field, what are the causes of selective mutism?
Well, that's interesting, because I actually believe there is only one cause of selective mutism, and that's what makes my research different to all the other literature that you will read, because whenever you read articles, people are suggesting lots and lots of different possible reasons and causes. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one cause, and it is certainly not the parents. I'll say that straight away. As with any phobia, it's nobody's fault. There is just an unfortunate sequence of events that leads to fear conditioning. That is the cause of a phobia. And just with Pavlov's dogs, who were conditioned to salivate whenever they heard a bell ringing, it was just an automatic response. They came to learn that the bell meant they were about to be fed. They were conditioned to salivate. In the case of a phobia, you're conditioned, and it's a very automatic thing, you're conditioned to react to a completely harmless trigger in the same way as you would react to a genuine threat. So you're being tricked into believing that there is a genuine threat, something to run away from, escape from, avoid. And in the case of selective mutism, the trigger, this harmless trigger, is the expectation to speak to somebody who is outside your immediate talking circle. When this fear conditioning takes place, parents are usually not even present. In the vast majority of cases, parents are not present when this occurs. So it's nothing to do with them at all. And yet they often blame themselves. It's natural to seek explanations. And so if they don't have the information that's in the manual, they're going to be looking for those explanations. And what usually happens is that they attribute the selective mutism to the things that the parents are aware of, the things they know about, things that maybe they already feel bad about. And they will put the SM down to those things like moving home when they knew that the child was happy at their previous school, or things like marital disharmony, or whatever. They will come up with all sorts of reasons and try and link the SM to that, and, as I say, blame themselves. But those are not those things. None of those things are responsible for the development of selective mutism. They may, any of those things and lots more things might contribute to general anxiety levels, either around the home generally or in the child themselves. Things like having a speech difficulty. There's going to be lots of things that may have an effect on your general anxiety level, but none of those things will be responsible for the SM. It's just this very unfortunate sequence of events. These factors all just come together and produce fear conditioning. And in the manual, we go into quite a lot of detail to give people examples of how this can happen. We look at all these possible contributing factors in detail, but essentially there are three things that come together to make this happen. The child's personality. They're going to be sensitive children, a bit of a worrier. That's the typical personality here. So it's a combination of the child's personality. Then there's going to be some sort of event, some sort of life event, which is going to involve the expectation to talk. And it's not going to be there's not going to be any real threat or danger. I must stress this. It's not something bad in the sense of how we would normally think of an emotional trauma. It's nothing like that. Just a day-to-day event that involves the expectation to talk. And then the third factor is how the child's perceptions of talking are handled immediately after that event. The way that we handle the SM and react to it and go on to react to it in the future, we call these the maintaining factors. Okay. And I think one of the big issues here is that with most childhood fears, we understand the cause of the child's fear and we intuitively address it. We don't force, we don't pressure, we just help the child to just gradually break that fear down and get used to something. But with selective mutism, most adults don't even know that the child has developed this fear. They are completely unaware, and it doesn't occur to them that when the child doesn't speak, they've actually developed a specific fear of talking. So we don't intuitively handle it in the way that we would handle, a fear like a fear of dogs or a fear of the darkness. That's what has made it so difficult for people to deal with in the past. They just didn't realize it was a fear. So I hope that's enough of an answer at the moment, because otherwise I think I'd be going through an entire chapter if I gave you all of the possible things that could happen. But as I said, the main thing is just to remember to not blame yourself if you're a parent listening to this. My daughter had several phobias. I have a phobia which I've largely overcome now, but I remember when I took my daughter, she saw a child psychiatrist when she was 10 for a phobia of ants, and I can remember learning from the psychiatrist how completely unwittingly all the things that I'd been doing, which I thought were helping my daughter to be less anxious about these ants, they were actually reinforcing her fear and making it worse. And I can remember listening to the psychiatrist with tears just rolling down my cheeks. I was just feeling I am the most awful parent. And the psychiatrist could see that I was upset, and she straight away just reassured me, and she said, look, Maggie, you didn't cause this. You didn't make this happen in the first place. You didn't cause this. And to be honest with you, you know, if it wasn't this particular incident we've identified, it would have been something else. You know, if children have this sensitive personality, they are vulnerable to developing fears, anxieties, phobias. And it's just, no, this is how it's worked out with your child. And at least with my daughter, a phobia of ants, I could tell she was very, very scared of ants. The things that she said, it was very obvious to me. But with selective mutism, it just doesn't occur to us very often that it's a fear of the actual act of talking itself. Because these children love the people that they're trying to talk to. They love their grandparents. They love their auntie. They love their teacher. And people know that. So it doesn't occur to them that this is a fear, because they see that the child really wants to talk to these people. But what it all boils down to is that the child has developed a fear of the actual physical mechanism of talking. It's the just producing voice and talking, that moment of speaking, that's what they have a phobia of. And why would it occur to you? It's like, it took me years to work it out. It probably took me, well, I can tell you, I worked it out in 1995 that it was a phobia, and that was after years of knowing it was an anxiety disorder. So I'd worked out that step-by-step approaches helped. So I was working out the techniques, but I still didn't know, where has this anxiety come from in the first place? So it was in 1995 I worked out it was a phobia, and I'd already been treating children with SM for a good 15 years at that point. I'm trying to do my maths now, but at least 15 years at that point. So yes, don't feel bad if you haven't worked it out yourself. That's what the manual is for.
Thank you so much, Maggie. What you have done in the field is groundbreaking and eye-opening, and what you have said will put a lot of parents at ease and ease their guilt about their children's situation. Thank you so much.